Good evening, everyone. It's October 28th, 2012. I'm Rene Ritchie, and tonight we are talking about Apple's October event. That means new Retina MacBook Pros, new iMacs, new Mac Minis, a new iPad, and a new iPad Mini. This is the iMore Show. Joining me tonight is the editor-in-chief of The Loop, loopinsight.com, the one and only Jim Dalrymple. How are you, Jim?
Great.
Well, thank you again for joining us. You had a busy week. You jetted off to you left the endless night that is Canadian winter. You went to sunny California for an Apple event.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
How was the California theater? It looked fantastic.
Yeah, it's a great venue. I mean, it's not the first event that they've had there. If you remember back at the U2, when they had U2 there for the U2 iPod, that was at the California Theater, and I believe that they had one other one at the California Theater, maybe the following year.
The event itself, it was an interesting event. We just had an event in September, so Apple did basically a double feature this fall.
Yeah, and it made sense because you had the iPhone, which really has to stand on its own. You know, the iPhone is an event, it's a product, it's a platform, and you really don't want to mix that up with other big announcements.
They're telling me I'm not on the air, so I'm just starting and stopping the feed again, and I'll edit this part out, but I just want to make sure they can see us. Reload the page.
Who's not on the air? You?
Us. They were saying that we weren't broadcasting properly, so I just restarted it. We'll get to what they announced at this event in a second, but Apple renewed or refreshed almost every single product in their lineup this fall and introduced a new one. That's a staggering amount of product for any company, especially one that's as focused as Apple.
Oh, it really is. I mean, if you look at the products that were just released last week, it's the MacBook Pro 13, the iPad Mini, the iPad 4. I mean, there's just so much that was released last week. Not to mention the iMac, which I think will be the sleeper hit of the whole event. You know, the iMac is going to be huge.
To set the stage, so they announced the iPhone and iPods in September. The iPhone came out, but the iPods literally came out a week or two before this event.
Yeah.
And now they're introducing new products, and these products are going to roll out over the course of the next month or so. So it's going to be a steady stream of Apple releases all fall.
Yeah, literally right up until the holidays, Christmas. It's going to be an incredible quarter, I think, for Apple.
So let's start, I guess, at the beginning. We had Tim Cook came out and he gave us the numbers. And I always love Tim Cook's numbers because they're not imaginary numbers. They're not numbers shipped or numbers that they hope that somebody orders. They're not numbers of a percentage of an area that is ill-defined and no one really understands. These are the number of products that actual customers bought and now own. And I think that's a standard other companies should start adhering to.
Well, everybody is talking about numbers. And unfortunately, the only company that really releases numbers is Apple.
Yeah.
I mean, how many Samsung phones have sold? Nobody knows.
They said tens of millions before they'd actually even shipped any.
Well, yeah, there you go. I mean, analysts come out afterwards and say, we think that Samsung sold 30 million.
Yeah.
Well, how do they know that?
Based on my cousin Fred buying one, I've extrapolated out 30 million.
You know, I mean, that's just stupid. And Amazon, they won't release any numbers. Google won't release any numbers. Nobody will release numbers. RIM releases numbers, but they're so low, nobody cares. Yeah. I mean, who cares about how many BlackBerries were shipped? Well, how much does a playbook cost now? Like
you can get them $150 in a
20 bucks and a bag of pucks. You know, I mean, come on.
Yeah, well, no, but I think that's an absolutely legitimate point because people they just see a number and they think that all numbers are created equal and that the number of products other companies have shipped can be compared directly. Apple is so precise about their numbers that they did not count a ton of iPhone 5 sales opening weekend because they hadn't shipped them yet.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, when you look at something like that, then Apple gets pulled down by these ridiculous financial analysts. And when it comes to that, it's not just Apple. It's a lot of companies get pulled down because of the financial analysts.
Yeah.
And how is it, in what world do we live in when an $8.2 billion profit
Yeah.
is a miss?
They didn't sell as many hundreds of millions of iPads as we hoped that they would.
It boggles my mind when I see $8.2 billion profit. And what was the revenue? 36 billion or
Yeah,
something?
it was. The numbers are getting too high for me to use Canadian math on, Jim.
Yeah, well, once you transfer all that into beaver pelts, and
It's more than our banks. I think it's staggering.
and yet Wall Street declared it a miss.
Yeah, we
And
missed on iPad
that
numbers.
makes no sense. That makes no sense at all. Even though, and they said that the biggest miss was on iPads.
Yes.
iPad, but iPad sales were up 26%.
They weren't up enough, Jim. But they want them to be up 3 million and 47.8%.
It just drives my beard crazy when stuff like that happens.
Well, but I like, again, that Tim Cook, he actually goes through it. He breaks down the number of apps, the number of downloads, the number of books. It's very easy. As a writer, and I'm sure you experience this too, it's very easy for me to go through and find all the Apple numbers. But to try to map those to any competitor is almost a futile effort at this point. I can't make a grid.
I've tried. I've tried in the past, and I can't. I've gone to Samsung. Of course, they don't show anything. But then I've gone to the individual manufacturers' websites, and some of them list shipped numbers. Most of them actually list shipped numbers. And trying to figure out what people are actually selling. I mean, you can come out and say anything. Remember, a little while ago, Amazon came out and said, "Oh, we're sold out of Kindles."
Yeah.
No, you're not. You stopped making them, dumbass.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I mean, don't treat us like we're stupid. We know that you stopped making them because you're coming out with a new one. And then you have the Stones to come out and say, we sold out. I mean, come on.
Or this weekend, they sold more Kindle Fires than ever before. But we don't know if that means they sold 21 instead of 20.
Yeah, could be.
It's
no idea.
It's unfathomable. It's impenetrable. Well, Tim Cook nailed down the numbers, so I like that. But then he actually introduced a new version of iBooks almost en passant in the middle of talking about iBooks numbers. Oh, by the way, he didn't identify it, but it's iBooks 3. It has language support for Asian countries, Korean, Japanese, Chinese, some excellent new features. Tim Cook doesn't often introduce new products, and it seems like iBooks was just kind of quickly moved aside to make room for all the massive amounts of hardware that was coming.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you have a product like iBooks that is ready for an update and has the iPad, which is, very educational friendly, you want to make sure it's in there. And, they did that. That's about all that they could do with something like iBooks. It is a great app. So, it's good that they got it in there and they didn't just update the app, because it's important to let education people know what's in there and why.
And I thought they'd make a bigger deal out of iBooks. But when I looked at it in hindsight, they did something really important. With the increased languages, I believe they now support 40 languages for iBooks. And even though people keep saying that the Kindle has this massive library advantage, their catalogs, I mean, it's hard. It's really, Apple said, what was it, 1.5 million books. It's very hard to get Kindle numbers because they don't break, the magazines are included. It's hard to tell. But they have 7 languages, 4 of which are based in Spain.
There you go.
So, and Apple's market, again, they keep pressing the Chinese market, the Japanese market. They're making tons of money in Asia. iPad will be in 90 plus countries. The Kindle will be in 5, 6, or 7.
Well, there's so many things that make all of this kind of shake your head, doesn't it?
It's a perception. I was asking on Twitter why people like the Kindle better than iBooks, and some people said catalog size, but I couldn't prove that. But the one thing it came down to is some people like the fact that they could buy the book once and use it on every platform. So Apple doesn't make iBooks for anything other than iOS devices, not even Macs, where the Kindle books are on every platform. They're both DRM bound, so I mean, like, you're basically stuck with whatever format you get legitimately, but you can get the Kindle books on multiple platforms if you switch.
Right, right. And for a lot of people, that's enough.
And I think
For me, it's not, because I like to have all of my media in one place. I mean, when I get a new Mac now, I get a Mac, or I get an iPad, or I get an iPhone, and I just log on to iCloud. All of my purchases are there. That's unbeatable to me.
that's a huge advantage.
I go to iBooks, and there are all my purchase books. Yes, download, and they're there. My music with iTunes Match, everything is there. That to me is just, it's unbeatable.
And that's the thing I think Apple has no interest in matching. Apple is excellent at making deals. They have the biggest content collection in the most places in the world. And I believe if they put their power behind it, they could easily eclipse Amazon in terms of raw titles. But I don't think they will ever start. I don't think you'll see iBooks for Android and iBooks for Windows 8 and iBooks for BlackBerry. So
No.
that's not a battle they want to fight.
No, I don't think it is a battle that they want to fight. I mean, Apple has some advantages. A lot of people are going to talk about the price, and people are going to talk about being locked in. But I don't look at it as being locked in. I mean, I bought every piece of music and video and everything else that I have from iTunes for a decade.
Yeah.
I don't feel locked in.
Well, so you and I are like Chuck Norris, Jim. We're going to wait. Like, DRM fell off of music. Now we can put our MP3s anywhere. DRM is going to fall off of probably ebooks long before it does video, and even video one day. And I'll wait. I'll get the best quality I can now, and I'll just wait for it to fall aside.
Well, I'm happy with the convenience, and for me, that's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
It's all about convenience, and if I can go into iCloud and just download all kinds of new things, or go into the Mac App Store and it knows, because I signed in, that you bought these apps and you can download them. I mean, that's perfect. It takes 10 minutes to set up a computer.
That's the only thing I miss about the iPod Nano, is it doesn't have the iTunes or iTunes Match on it.
Yeah, but the Nano is my favorite iPod. And even as it sits without iTunes Match, it's still my favorite iPod, because the Nano represents everything that is an iPod for me.
Yeah, it's old school.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said for just syncing your iPod and going. Now, on my iPhone, I love iTunes Match. It's great. It's great to have. I use it all the time. Love it. But
iPod Touch too. I mean, you can set up an iPod Touch now in 3 seconds.
Right. But an iPod Touch is great. But if you're looking at, for me, the ultimate iPod, it wouldn't be the Touch. It would be the Nano.
Yeah.
And that's just personal preference on my part.
So Tim Cook then, he finished his segment. He brought Phil Schiller out to do what Phil Schiller does best. And Phil Schiller, for me, is getting better and better every show. The first time he did Macworld, Apple's last Macworld, he was kind of affable, but he didn't own the stage. And now, to me, it feels like he's owning that stage.
Well, I really think that he is. I do. Tim, I interviewed Tim once, and he was a very quiet guy. Tim is obviously, he must be very confident. He does a great job. But he's not, loud and boisterous, and to take somebody like that, I mean, Tim was in front of the world.
Yeah.
Literally in front of the world. And I thought he did a great job.
Super job. I mean, he anchors those shows. He's become the heart. If you'd asked me before if the numbers, logistics, and execution guy could be the heart and soul of Apple, I would have hesitated for a second. But he describes the vision, the passion, the meaning. He talks about special needs and accessibility, and he's really become that guy.
Yeah. Well, and let's not forget Schiller.
Yeah.
I think that Phil has really come into his own over the past couple of shows. Remember, Steve used to use Phil as kind of the comic guy.
Yeah.
and he would do a lot of funny things, and people loved it. Phil did a great job at doing it, but now Phil is introducing the products, and he's doing a lot of great stuff.
Kind of stalks across that stage now. He's got
Yeah.
a real presence to, and he started off by introducing the 13-inch MacBook Pro. I don't think that was a huge surprise because they don't have 17-inch MacBook Pros anymore, and Air is it's hard to fit enough battery and other things into an Air to make it Retina at this point. So the 13-inch was logical, but it was really nice to see the Retina start spreading across the Mac line.
Well, I think it's great to see the Retina in the 13-inch, which I think is their top selling computer. So that's going to make a big difference to a lot of people. Now, I do think that it's going to be split, because I had a 13-inch Air and I loved the Air. But when I saw the Retina display, I had to have one.
I know.
So that was a 15-inch Retina that I had to get. And now that they have the 13 Retina, now I'm thinking, wow, I really did like that 13-inch.
I'm exactly the same problem. But the thing is, now I'm used to having the quad core. I'm used to having the discrete graphics processor. I do a lot of Final Cut. I do a lot of Photoshop. But that 13-inch just looks so sexy.
Well, see, I started off with an 11.
Yeah.
And I tried that. And unfortunately, the way a lot of websites are done, you have to scroll all the time. And I didn't like to scroll all the time. I'd like to be able to go to a website and, start seeing content right away. And you couldn't do that on the majority of sites. So I found that one to be too small. And when I went to the 13, it was just perfect.
Yeah.
So that's what one I used until the Retina came out.
Now, the 13-inch MacBook Air, that was, again, exactly the same. That was my favorite, absolute best Mac of all time until the 15-inch Retina. The 13-inch Retina MacBook Pro does not have the same level of screen resolution as the 13-inch MacBook Air, but it does have that mode that you can switch it to where it goes to the gigantic display and scales it down. And I think I would just live in that mode.
Yeah, I mean, that mode is, well, it's tough, though, to get a lot of things done. I ended up leaving mine. I tried all those different modes, and you were coming right up close to the screen wondering, what is that?
I only use it for Photoshop now because Adobe still hasn't updated for Retina.
Yeah, I use Pixelmator now for a lot of my stuff. And it's great. So it does the majority of the work that I need to do.
Now, they kept the old MacBook Pros around. I'm guessing that's because, when Apple introduces Retina, there's a little bit of a cost. They tend to be pricier, or they tend to have a lot of performance overhead because they really push those GPUs as hard as they can. So I think it's smart to leave this as a lower price point transitional machine until Retina becomes a new normal.
Yeah, and I think that that there will be, Retina will become the new normal at some point. But, I wouldn't be surprised if they kept a non-Retina computer in there somewhere.
Becomes the white MacBook, basically.
Yeah. You need a white MacBook.
Yeah.
The white MacBook, I think, still sold pretty well. And once that stops, once people, become accustomed and say, okay, it is a Retina, that's what we're going to do, then fine.
Yeah. When the Retina's $1,000, it goes away.
Yeah. Well, and the white MacBook, then it goes away.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And after that, Schiller made a nice little joke. He said, "You're expecting us to talk about the Mini, so here's the Mac Mini." Yeah. And the casing didn't change, but it got all the new chipset. It got it is an amazing Mac for the, I think it's $600 it starts at, and the server for $1,000 is a really amazing OS X server.
Yeah. I mean, what's that Mac Mini Colo?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there are server farms made out of Mac Minis. I mean, they're great little machines. I had a Mac Mini for years, and it worked great.
And then, as you alluded to earlier, they brought out the new iMac, which I think would be illegal in a lot of states simply because it looks like a razor blade at this point. It's got a 5 millimeter edge. They shaved every bit of aluminum off that thing they could, and then they used stir. I forget what it was, stir something welding, which they use on rockets to make it almost. Phil Schiller said molecular level welding.
Yeah, imagine that.
Yeah.
Imagine that. They're doing, they're not just going in like we used to in high school with our acetylene torches and
the big mask.
the big mask. I mean, these are really, really thin. And I went up to the hands-on area after the event, and the first thing that I walked up to was the iMac, because I couldn't believe how thin it was. And, if you look at it side on, there is a hump in the back.
Yeah.
But it's not, it's not like the CRT type hump. It's just a little hump. So it's hard to believe that there really is a computer in there at this point.
The 3GS kind of had a little hump on its, the 3G and the 3GS had a little hump on its back for a while until Apple flattened it out. But I'm sure Apple didn't do this intentionally, but like a lot of Windows machines had begun almost exactly copying the iMac down to the keyboard and the touchpad. And arguably, if they didn't have that little oasis of the Apple Store within a store, you might look around at all the, one-off computers and kind of compare them. No one is going to mistake the new iMac for anything else on the market.
No, not at this point. But it won't take long for everybody to come around and copy that too.
You think HP can do molecular welding? I think it's gonna take them about 2 years maybe to figure out what it is, and then
they'll put out a fake one.
There's no computer inside it. It's just we can't fit the computer in yet, but you can buy this for now. And
I think that the big thing about the iMac is the fact that it's starting to be able to do a lot of the things that you can do with like a Mac Pro. For instance, I'm really interested to see if it can do the things on the music stuff that I do, because it's got Thunderbolt now. So the iMac has 2 Thunderbolt ports, and I just got a new Thunderbolt audio interface from Universal Audio. So I'm wondering, can that take over a lot of the music stuff? I mean, it's not like it's not powerful enough.
Absolutely.
It's got the power to do it. So, that should be really interesting. I'm looking forward to trying that out at some point.
And like you said, they have they have HDMI capture cards you can plug into Thunderbolt. They're doing all the peripherals that used to be inside a Mac Pro outside now.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's going to be important for me. I mean, think about, I can record an entire band that's, say, a dozen mics on a drum kit. Well, you can do it with a lot less, but I had a dozen mics on the drum kit, and then I just, cut out the ones that I didn't want at the end, but I like to record everything. I had a bass guitar, 2 electric guitars, and a vocal, all coming into the Mac Pro. And it recorded without a hitch, as you would expect. But that was on until recently, that was on a 7-year-old Mac Pro.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, this wasn't a new machine. Well, I can also do a lot of that on a MacBook Pro. I've recorded, right into my MacBook Pro too. So we know that the power in the new chips is there, and that's with 8 gigs of RAM as well. My Mac Pro has 16. So if I put 16 gigs on an iMac,
you can go up to 32 now on the new iMac.
Well, yeah. But if I just go with the 16 that I have on my Mac Pro, how much could I do on an iMac? And a Thunderbolt connector? I think I could do quite a bit. I really do.
I'm in the same boat because I have the original Nehalem Mac Pro, and I got 8 cores, but they're the slow cores, and I'm hard-pressed to see, because Apple's probably not going to update those, at least if that Tim Cook thing was accurate, until the end of next year, and that's a long time, and those iMacs look really hot.
Yeah.
Someone in the chat room I think it was Paul, told me to be nice to HP. I am not being mean to HP. HP is being mean to HP. There is no reason a company like HP shouldn't be at the head of innovation like Apple, but they will do things like buy WebOS and destroy it. They will buy Voodoo and make Raoul Sood leave the company, make John Rubinstein leave the company. Apple is existing right now, in my opinion, 2 years in the future, because like we discussed last show, they make the equipment to make the equipment. They design the stuff to design the stuff. And I would love other companies to do that. I'd like to see equally innovative things across the industry. So in my opinion, again, they're being mean to themselves. It's not me.
Well, and I think that's where a lot of these companies fall short. I would love to see somebody come along and say, okay, Apple made the iMac, and we think that they're totally wrong.
Yes.
This is what we made because this is the better way to go. But instead, what they do is come out and say, Apple made the iMac, and here's our copy of it.
Yeah. And we're not going to acknowledge that we're copying it, and we're going to ask you in your review not to acknowledge that we're copying it.
Yeah, please, don't say that we copied the iMac or that it even looks like it was an iMac copy. So that to me is set. I don't mind competition. I would love somebody
absolutely
to compete with Apple. But what I do mind is when a company like HP or Dell or whatever, or Microsoft comes out with a product that simply copies what Apple is doing, and then doesn't even admit that they're copying what Apple.
We don't like laziness. I think that's the thing that offends us. At a certain level, the laziness of that offends us as people who love technology.
Yeah. I'm very happy with somebody coming out and saying, here's what we think will work. Now, Microsoft is doing that now with the Surface, but I don't think that they have it right.
But I agree with you. I'm glad that they think there's something that exists between an iPad and a MacBook Air, and they're going to try and do it. At least they're trying.
Yeah. And Steve Stressa says that HTC and LG are doing really tiny phones, so they have to be doing a lot of research to make that happen.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree. But I think we've been there, haven't we? I mean, for me, I had really tiny phones, back maybe 8 years ago. The tinier the phone, the better.
The Centro, the Veer, the Palm Veer you could stack 3 Palm Veers on a Nexus.
Well, remember those little tiny Nokia phones, those little tiny little things. And the thing was, how small can you make that phone go? But at that point, all we were doing was making phone calls.
Mm-hmm.
That's all that we were doing. Now we expect our phones to be devices. We want them to be able to do something for us. We want to be able to work on them. We want to be able to communicate with them. Back then, if you didn't talk on the phone, it was in your pocket. So it was a different landscape back then.
I'm even happy Windows Phone and BlackBerry 10 are doing completely different user interfaces for phones, because whether they succeed or not, it keeps pushing user interface forward on mobile devices.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at the interfaces that Windows Phone is different, clearly Windows Phone is doing, it's clearly different than what Apple is doing, and good for them.
Yeah.
And if it works for them and Apple is wrong, then so be it.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can't expect Samsung to do something on their own. They'll just copy whatever Apple does, so we know what they're going to come out with.
I think they might I have this feeling, and this might be totally wrong, but Samsung makes refrigerators. They come across the market. They make a refrigerator look like everybody else's. They probably just walked in and said, okay, this is what a phone looks like. That's the most successful phone. We'll make that. And as they get more acclimatized to the market and more successful, maybe they'll start taking more risks. That's my hope, Jim.
Well, that would be nice. I would like to see that. But,
You want evidence. You want facts.
The thing is, Samsung does the same thing in every market it's in. It copies, it clones, it, steals whatever it can.
It's like the Borg.
Yeah. I just don't see them changing. I mean, if everything holds true, the next iPhone should be, a relatively significant design change, right? Next year.
If they do a 5S, if they go to a 6, it'll depend on their strategy.
Right. So if the next time, let's just say this, the next time they do a big design change, I don't think it's too far out of the realm that Samsung will come out with a design change that would be similar to what Apple just did. because that's what they do.
There is an iPhone 3GS look to a lot of Samsung's current products.
Do you think?
There's not yet an iPhone 4 look, so maybe that is next.
Well,
That's a,
time Apple sued their pants off too. So
that's actually a good transition to mobile. So there was a short break after the Macs, and then Tim Cook came back out. He spoke about the iPad market, incredible adoption rates. He spoke a little bit about iBooks Author, handed it back to Phil Schiller. And this is a part that surprised me, Jim. They led off with the iPad 4th generation. I mean, there were rumors that this product was coming, but I thought it would be more like a Verizon iPhone where we're adding LTE to international markets. You can get LTE in Europe and Australia now. And oh, by the way, it's got the Lightning connector, and under the scenes, we fixed a few things about it. But Apple just came right out and said, it's the iPhone 4. It was an incredibly respectful thing to tell customers. Like, it wasn't like trying to, pull the wool over their eyes, but it was an incredibly aggressive thing as well.
yeah, it was, and I saw some reporters, complaining about that CNET, um, saying that, oh, we had a deal, you would release something. Oh, shut up! Just shut up. Yeah, you didn't have any kind of a deal. Do you know that? Do you have a deal with Sony where they're not going to release any TVs after you buy one for a year? No, they're going to release, 2 or 3 versions in a year of a TV. They're going to release a new version whenever they want.
One of our writers, Joe, had a really good take on it that I liked. He said, "Why are you complaining? You got the iPhone 4 5 months early."
Yeah.
What's interesting, though, is typically, so the iPad, the 4th generation iPad, it has the better LTE chip, same as the iPhone 5. It has an A6X processor, so the same processor as the iPhone 5, only with the quad-core graphics to drive that Retina display. And it has a new Lightning connector. And that's a lot of stuff, but it's still an iPad 3, X in Apple's model numbers, which I thought was interesting because the iPhone 3G was 1, 2. Apple said no new processor, no new generation. Then the 3GS was the iPhone 3. The iPhone 4 was a model number 4. Apple, I'm sure there's an arbitrariness to these model numbers, and they're not meant to be seen by human beings. But I just thought it was odd that Apple kind of internally downplayed this and then externally was just like very forthright about it.
Well, I mean, I agree with what you said just a minute ago. I mean, the model numbers are what they are. I really don't pay much attention to them because I think if you go to a store, it's not like a lot of the other manufacturers where they have 20 models of something.
Yeah.
You go to an Apple store, I want an iPad. Yeah. Okay. Well, now would you like an iPad or an iPad mini? You don't have iPad 3, iPad 4,
There's no iPad 3S.
Yeah, you have when the first thing that you see in there, iPad.
Yeah.
So,
and it's not even the new iPad anymore. Now it's the iPad with Retina display, similar to the regular MacBook and the MacBook with Retina display.
Yeah, I just think that the version number is almost becoming like a spec.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially in an Apple store.
You don't look at the MacBook Pro 10,1.
Yeah, I mean, you walk in, you want a MacBook Pro. I want an iPad. I want an iPhone.
I do like because Apple, it was getting a little muddy. I thought with the new iPad, it was a little harder to search for stuff, but I like the fact that you have the MacBook Pro and the iPad, the MacBook Pro with Retina display and the iPad with Retina display, because to me, that sort of clicks mentally. You understand the difference you're getting, where iPad 2 and new iPad, I think, was a little more confusing for people.
Yeah. I mean, all that stuff is always confusing. The more models you put in, the more confusing things get. But basically, when you go in and you want to take an iPad, you get an iPad. You pick your size and you pick whether you want LTE or not.
Yeah.
And that's it.
And that brings us delightfully to the iPad mini, which Phil Schiller revealed basically by putting Yoda in a little Luke Skywalker backpack on the original iPad when he turned it around. And I like the Jonathan Ive line where he said, we didn't make the iPad smaller. That would be a horrible product. We concentrated it.
Yeah. Yeah. And from what I saw, they did a really good job.
Now, you were unconvinced. You were on the record as being unconvinced about the smaller form factor.
Unconvinced.
You are convinced now, officially.
No, I'm not. I'm
Okay.
not totally convinced because I think I need more time
Okay.
with it. I mean, it would be kind of bad, I think, if I could walk into a hands-on area and say, oh, "Okay, now I'm totally convinced."
Now that it has an Apple logo on it, I'm convinced.
Totally convinced now. No, so I'm not totally convinced. I did go in. I got some hands-on time with it. I understand what people are saying about the mini and how they want to use it, and that they, if you're standing on a train and you're commuting to work and you want to have the iPad mini in your hand so you can read a book or read the newspaper that morning.
A one-handed iPad, basically.
Yeah, basically. So I understand how people really want that. That's a reasonable use for a mini.
Now, because you were skeptical about it, I think that makes your opinion especially interesting here. And the thing I like about it is that you tend not to review things based on spec sheets and things like you review about how they fit into your life. And your skepticism was about whether you could fit this kind of device into your life.
Yeah, and that's, to me, that's what it's all about. And there's one question here that Jessica has. So Jim touched it. Is the shrunk down screen really clearer than the iPad 2? It's been a while since I've had the iPad 2, but I can say that this screen is really very nice. It is very clear.
On paper, it should be the same as the iPhone 3GS.
Yeah,
but with the new technology,
it's really a really nice screen. I mean, I did as much as I could on it. In the time that I had it in the hands-on area. But I had no issues with it.
Did you miss the Retina? Because you've used the MacBook Pro with Retina, the iPhone with Retina, the iPad 3/4 with Retina. Did you notice pixels immediately?
No, no, nothing like that. I mean, when I looked at pictures or when I looked at text in an iBook, websites, and the picture that I posted of it when I was holding it, when it was on the loop, I blew it up. I double tap and zoom and all that kind of stuff, and it was fine. There was no issue with any of the text or any of the clarity of images or anything like that at all.
I think it's important to remember too that it's a modern Apple panel. It's not the panel from the iPad 2 or even the iPhone 3GS. Everything that they've learned by making the iPhone 5 and iPod Touch 5 panel is in this one.
Yeah, well, I agree with Jessica, and I talked about this before, that the telling thing for me with the Retina display and with a lot of these things is the text. Mm-hmm. Because mostly what I do on these things is read. I'm either reading for research, to save files for next time. Sometimes I'm writing, so the text has to be very clear for me because that it bothers me when it's not. I hate pixelated things.
It's like sandpaper on your eyeballs.
Exactly. So I wasn't able to sit down and read or write a whole document, but what I did see, I was very happy with. I must say that.
There were no immediate deal breakers.
No, nothing immediate. Now, for me, a device is like any type of software. There's people that come out all the time with this software and say, this will change the way that you work. Well, yeah, you really have to prove that to me. Yeah. And the iPad Mini is kind of in that case. And Dominic just asked, I missed the first time he asked this, would you replace the iPad with the iPad Mini? I think that all depends on the person. Mm-hmm. I don't see why I wouldn't. Because, I thought a lot about the time that I had with the Mini and, walking around and how I would use it. My big question is when I put the computer down for the night and I pick up my iPad, I'm doing things like, saving articles into Instapaper. And that's the time when I actually get to read some articles,
Yes.
that I've saved earlier in the day. Um, like some of the stuff that you write, I read that at midnight, and maybe that goes into my queue for next day, or I just read for enjoyment. So I'm used to having the iPad to be able to do that. Can I do that with the iPad Mini? Sure. Will it be more productive if I do that with
Will
the
you
iPad?
enjoy it as much?
Uh, maybe I could. I don't know. Maybe I could get up and walk around and do things with the iPad Mini that I can't do with the iPad because it's a bit bigger.
I think you're exactly right about the person and the lifestyle, because for me, I think the differentiator will be if you're someone who has a MacBook Air and takes it everywhere with you, you may not need a full size iPad as well. The mini might be a better choice for you because it keeps everything light. For example, I take my iPad with me everywhere just to tether because I don't want to drain my phone's battery, and the iPad will last all day tethering for me. But I could easily use an iPad mini for that, and I think I'm going to. But if you're the kind of person who leaves a laptop at home and takes the iPad and like a Logitech keyboard or something with you, I think you'll be more productive on the bigger, more powerful iPad than you would be on an iPad mini.
Yeah, and Logan asks if we think that there'll be a Retina display in the Mini. And I think at some point it would make sense to have a Retina display in the Mini because it's clear they can make the screens. But, I think a lot of it comes down to price point and what they're able to fit in.
It would also be very thick if they did it right now.
Well, I mean, there are some considerations for a Retina that Apple has to take into account. And I think one of the biggest ones right now is cost.
Yeah.
And they have to fit what they have into those price points.
And if you look at the iPad mini, it's 50, they say 52% thinner than the regular iPad. And the regular iPad, part of that thickness is the battery and everything to support the Retina display. And I don't think anyone would want a twice as thick iPad mini. Apple wouldn't want that now.
Well, you have to look at what people are going to buy and what they're going to use it for.
Yeah.
Sure, we want a Retina display on our iPhones. We probably want a Retina display on our Mini. We definitely want one on the iPad.
Yeah, MacBook Air. We want it on everything, Jim.
We want it on everything. But we have to take into account costs, and we have to take into account choices. So for my iPhone, right now, my iPhone is my communication device, whether that's email, phone, Twitter, when I'm on the move. That's my communication device. At night, sometimes through the day, if I'm sitting out back, kind of relaxing a bit, taking a break, it'll be the iPad or maybe the iPad mini.
Yeah.
And, when I sit down to work, that's my MacBook. And whether that'll be a 15-inch Retina or a 13-inch Retina remains to be seen. But either one of those would work easily for me. I would enjoy either one of those. So, Apple, to me, I left out the iPad Touch in there on purpose because it's not one of the devices that I use on a regular basis. So if you have the iPhone, the iPad mini, the iPad, and the MacBook Pro, I mean, there's everything that you can do. I mean, for me, that's everything that I do. That takes into account everything. There's no situation where I think I could be left with one of those 4 devices and couldn't get things done.
I think that's an excellent point. I'm just going to note for a second. Jessica in the chat room just did an, oh my God, it's thinner than the iPhone. Do you guys realize it? And it really is. According to the specs, Jim, it's 7.2 millimeters, which is the same thickness as the previous generation iPod Touch, which in my mind is ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. I mean, I really, you remember the first time you picked up an iPhone 5 and realized how light it was? And here I say you remember, it was only a month ago.
It's crazy.
But it's that same kind of thing when you pick up an iPad mini. You pick it up and it's so light. And, you're walking around, you have it in one hand, and you can move your thumb and scroll and you can do all this kind of stuff. And you realize that this is an iPad.
Yeah.
It's not an iPhone. So, you have a little bit extra space. You have those iPad apps, 250,000?
Yeah.
So
multi-column apps, unlike the iPhone.
Yeah.
And what's nice is I like the way Apple subtly educates people in their videos and their commercials, because some people complained about the bezel being too thin, but you see the guy in the commercial holding it in one hand, using his thumb to flip through pages, which is almost like it's exactly why it is designed in that way.
Well, here's a good question for you. Logan's asking what you think of the price. Asking what both of us think of the price. It's $329 price point. That people were complaining about that.
I thought it was odd it wasn't even numbers, because Apple usually has, the 150, and that it's usually around those numbers. So I thought a 29 was a little odd for Apple, but for a 16 gigabyte device, that's absolutely ballpark.
I I think a lot of people were surprised with the 329 price for sure. Um, uh, but I don't know. I think that we all want these devices to be as cheap as possible so that we can all go out and buy them. But when you hold this, you realize that there's some workmanship in here. That it's not just a plastic piece of crap.
Mhm.
It's not cheap. It's not cheap feeling. It feels like something that was well put together. That there was some thought put into it.
It's substantial.
Yeah, even when you hold it and the way that you hold it, it feels comfortable. You know how sometimes you pick something up and it's supposed to fit in your hand, whether that's a game controller or whatever. It's supposed to fit in your hand, but it really doesn't. It kind of, cuts into your hand.
Mhm.
That's what some of the other products are like. But the iPad, it seems to be, um, it seems to fit right in there. It's made for that one hand. But I also held it in two, and hold my fingers on and did some typing and stuff. Going to websites and things like that. Um, so it just felt comfortable to me, and I think I'm a firm believer, and always have been, in that you get what you pay for.
Absolutely. Cost is not the same thing as value.
No, no, and if people are going to say, well, 329 is too much money, and I'm going to buy a Samsung device instead, hey, see ya.
Yeah, absolutely.
You go right ahead. I pity you.
Now,
Um,
my mea culpa is I did hear there'd be an 8 gigabyte version under $300, but obviously no 8 gigabyte version materialized, no under 300 gigabyte version materialized. But even if there was one, the next $100 price point would have been $300 or over, which is why I said that that's the ballpark for a 16 gigabyte device, and Apple's fairly consistent with that across their product lines.
somebody asked about the gestures on the Mini. I'm sorry, I didn't get a chance to even get into the gestures at all. Just
We
didn't
did hear, I think Mac Stories posted it, that there is a better, I don't know if it's better, but there is newer touch recognition to make sure you're not doing inadvertent contacts along the bezel because it's a thinner bezel.
Well, that part is true, yes.
Yeah.
But as far as gestures go and using apps, I just didn't get a chance to use it. But yeah, if you pick up the Mini and you have your finger, as you pick it up, your thumb right here would be on the screen. So if you normally if you put your thumb on the screen, it's going to do something,
Yeah.
especially if you're reading a book or something. It's going to activate a page turn. Well, that would really,
Yeah, that would suck.
yeah,
Yeah.
that would. So yeah, there is some more advanced things where that doesn't happen. So you can take your thumb and scroll, or put your thumb on the screen, and it knows the difference.
There was. We'll transition quickly because I'm sure Jim will have an opinion on this. Amazon went almost immediately on the offensive after the product was announced. Coincidentally, when they announced their first quarterly loss in the company history. But in the press release for the loss, there was a bunch of negative campaigning about the iPad mini. And today on Amazon.com, there's a comparison between the Kindle Fire HD 7 inches and the iPad mini. And I spent some time putting together a post to kind of explain the difference between screen size and screen density, because they're really very different things. The iPad mini, like Apple alluded to, is a bigger screen. And because it's 4:3, you get a much higher thing, which I think you were talking about with the MacBook Air 11, Jim, that you miss the vertical height when you're going through web pages. You have to scroll a lot. And that's exactly what happens on Android devices now, especially with their toolbar along the bottom. And Apple is kind of staked out 4:3 and this ratio for their tablets.
Did you see Amazon's homepage, right?
Yeah, Amazon.com.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised. I got to be honest with you. I was surprised with that because Amazon did a great job up until now of not talking about the iPad in any of their things. They talked about the Kindle. And that's what you should be talking about. They should be focused on the Kindle. And all of a sudden, they're focused on the iPad. That's a mistake for them. They shouldn't focus on the iPad. And when a company like Amazon starts to focus on Apple's new product, it makes me think that they're more concerned than what I would think that they would be, which makes me concerned. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If Amazon had said nothing, I would have thought, okay, they said nothing,
and put up a poster, the cheapest tablet on the market or something.
That's what I expected they would say, nothing. But when they do say something, then you got to sit back and say, hey, wait a minute, what's Amazon doing? Why are they saying something about this? And then you start, hey, what were their numbers last time? Are they starting to be worried here? So I think it raised more flags than what it really needed to. And somebody just brought up a good point here that Apple didn't have a product in the same category. Well, that's true, but I wrote a piece a little while ago where I think that Amazon is one of the only ones in the tablet market that won't be affected by what Apple does, or won't be affected that much, because people buy a Kindle for the brand, the same reason that they buy Apple. They buy Kindle for different things than what they buy the iPad for. Both may buy it to read, but it's a good brand, and people are going to continue to buy that brand unless they think that there's something wrong with the brand. And Amazon is not doing itself any favors by trying to take down the iPad. So that part of it, I didn't get at all.
They did go a little bit on the event, really oddly, in the Kindle Fire HD event when they introduced the new larger screen Kindle and spent an uncomfortable amount of time talking about MIMO Wi-Fi, at least in terms of like what humans would care about in terms of technology. But conversely, Apple had the Nexus 7 up on screen, and I initially thought that was a little odd for Apple because they don't usually do that. But the minute they started explaining it, it seemed to me they were explaining why the iPad mini was eventually going to be higher priced than the Nexus 7, and explain, like, using the screen size and content area as a way to prep you for what the price would be.
Well, I think that makes sense. I mean, people, and I get why, but people want the quality of Apple at the price of Amazon. Mm-hmm. And that's just not going to happen. I mean, Apple is not going to release something like an iPad cheaply. They're going to make the best iPad that they can. They're going to put some workmanship into it. They're going to put the quality into it. But they're going to price it the way that they need to price it to make money. And look at the last quarter.
Yeah.
Amazon reported a loss of $274 million. Now, granted, they had a write-off that they had to take in there, but even if you exclude the write-off, they still had over $100 million loss. And Amazon is selling their Kindles at cost. Jeff Bezos admitted that just a little while ago. I mean, we suspected that they were, but now we know for sure. And Apple is charging, quite a bit for their products, you could say, but you get the quality.
And they even said it was a lower margin product than Apple usually does.
Right. And here Apple is made $8.2 billion in the same time frame that Amazon lost $274 million. Mm-hmm. I mean, Apple has, buys companies and has write-offs and does all the same types of stuff. It's smart business.
Yeah.
Apple make smart purchases, so they don't have to write off poor performing deals and companies.
They are as profitable. They are profitable to a degree that is usually only found amongst companies that have oligopoly control over fossil fuel resources.
And even more so.
Yes. Uh, it's actually interesting because I think Ryan Block said it really well when he said that it's difficult for Amazon to make these comparisons because they're not selling you a tablet. They're selling you a content appliance. It is, you can't buy a Kindle Fire expecting to use it like an iPad. And again, iPad, 90 plus countries, Kindle Fire, I think is 7 now. iPad has content in almost all those countries. Kindle, very few languages. It's a very specific product. And you can argue that the iPad has, iTunes, App Store, iBook Store, but the Kindle Fire only exists to be a mobile front end to Amazon store.
Right, right. Yeah, and as opposed to Apple, where you have the store, which is just one piece of the pie.
And you can put an Amazon store on there. You can put Netflix on there. You can put Google stuff on there.
Yeah, I mean, there's another good point. Neil says the Kindle is subsidized by ads. Yeah, I mean, Apple hated ads. I mean, you can tell that they hate ads. They don't want to have anything to do with them, even though they have iAds, which is supposedly there to make developers money. And not being a developer, I don't know how that's working.
And they actually investigated an ads subsidized operating system and decided not to do it. So it's not that they never thought of this. They explored that years ago.
Yeah, and Steve just wasn't a fan.
Yeah.
And I don't blame him. I don't mind ads that make sense, but I don't like things popping up on me all of a sudden and,
No, Steve Strez in the chat room is saying it doesn't sound like iAds is working well because they rarely talk about it. And I don't know if it's doing ping level badly. And you hear different things about iAds in different countries. And I think to a large extent, we get a very American-centric technology picture where the Kindle Fire is a great product in the US. iAds might be a good service in the US. When you live outside the US, it's much harder. The iPad in Canada is a fantastic device. And I said this before, the Kindle Fire is a paperweight. And that, when you look at how much money Apple is making in the rest of the world, I think it would behoove more companies to be more international in their thinking.
Well, is there anything besides RIM that's ping level bad?
Ouch. The other thing I thought interesting is when they at the conference call, the earnings call, they had again iPods going down in revenue, and the iPod Touch is still 50% of Apple's iPod revenue, but it's 50% of a lower revenue pool for Apple. And I think that's interesting because the iPad is just rocketing straight up. Wonderful hockey graph. Now they have the iPad mini. And when you look at iPod going down, Apple is usually very good about having something else ramping up when one thing is kind of ramping down.
No, they have been very good at doing that. But I've said before that I think what Apple is doing here is just closing the gap.
Yeah.
They did that with the iPod. They released the iPod. They swung back around with the iPod mini, then the Nano to replace the mini, and then the Shuffle. And that's what they're doing here. I think they come out with the iPad, then they had the iPhone, then they have the iPad, so they have small and big, and then they swung around and got something in the middle and got that 7-inch. And it makes sense. So anywhere a company tries to go now, they're going to bump up against one of those three products.
Which is still, compared to a lot of companies, Apple is still remarkably focused on the amount of products they make. They are not by any means doing a throw things on the wall and see what sticks strategy, which a lot of their rivals seem to still be doing.
Yeah, I agree.
A couple of things that were also interesting. Tim Cook was asked about the 7-inch tablet comments that Steve Jobs made. And I always found those funny because if you listen to the whole transcript, Steve Jobs is talking about 7-inch tablets that run smartphone applications.
Yes.
And Tim Cook, I think, rightly addressed that this is a 7.9-inch. And while it sounds silly, when you go to 3x4 aspect ratio and you run iPad apps, that is not the same product category that Steve Jobs was talking about.
No, and if I've had used 7-inch tablets, and I've held the iPad Mini. It's a huge difference. I'll tell you, it's huge.
We put up
And
a screenshot side by side with some of the different apps. So you can actually see what tablet software looks like at 7.9 inches as opposed to smartphone software at 7 inches.
yeah, I mean, you may look at it and say, "Wow, that's not much," but try fitting things on there. It is a lot, and try taking your smartphone app and blowing it up to fit on a 7-inch screen, and then get some of these developers, Steve Strosa, and the great developer, and the stuff that he does for the iPad. It's totally different when you get an app that's optimized for an iPad, not just blown up, but using that screen real estate and putting things on there that we're going to be able to use so that it makes the app better.
The Gmail app for iPad is, in my opinion, a better tablet app than the Gmail app for the Nexus 7.
Yeah.
It's got multi-column. You can slide aside to get the sidebar. It's a more tablet experience, which is insane when you think about it.
And that's what we count on as users. I mean, we count on people like Steve to say, okay, we're going to release an iPad app that also has to work on an iPad Mini, and what can we do to make this not just a blown up iPhone app? What can we do with Pocket to say, here is an iPad app that is different, same company, same app, but we've laid it out so that it's better. You have more screen real estate, and there are things that you can do. We count on developers to do that. And as users, we will pay developers to buy that app or to buy their service, or, to talk about them and say, this is how we want apps to be. But when other developers come out and say, well, here's my app and I just blew it up, we're going to look at that and say, you know what? No, that's not good enough. And so we should. That's what we should do. We talk with our money. Rene, our websites are the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Readers talk with their eyes and with their money. And, if they don't like what I'm doing, they're going to come to you. Or if they don't like what you're doing, they're going to come to me. I mean, it's how it works.
Their attention is our currency.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the last sort of almost fun thing to talk about is the Apple yacht, the Steve Jobs family yacht that, I don't know if you saw it today, but it launched in the Netherlands. And it is the closest thing to a floating Apple store that I think we will ever see. It's got an ultralight aluminum body. It's got teak floors. It's got wall-to-wall, ceiling-to-ground glass. It's got 7 what look to be brand new iMacs in the wheelhouse. It is an Apple product when I look at it.
I want one.
You want the yacht or the yacht mini?
I'd even take the mini, I'll tell you that. Yeah, Venus, that's right.
Yep.
Fritz just said Venus. It was pretty impressive. There is no doubt.
It just shows, I think, how deeply ingrained that aesthetic was for Steve. Like, what he cared about, he didn't just care about to make a computer or a store. Those were the values that he had as a product person.
Well, yeah, and that's what I'm saying. That's what we should strive to with every product. That's what I want to see developers come up with. And that's why, when a developer, you and I get so many emails from developers every day, and I see developers and say, here's my new app, and I take a look and I look at it and think, wow, that looks like shit.
Yeah.
It's
hard because we want to love apps. We love developers, and we really, really want to love apps.
And then I see it, and some of these times it's, I'm not somebody I know. We both have a lot of friends that are developers. I don't report on all their products because some of them, quite frankly, don't deserve it. They don't deserve the attention. But when I see an app, whether it's from a good developer or a new developer that's good, I'll read about it. I'll put up a link to it and say, this looks really cool.
Absolutely.
And I think that's part of what we have to do too to help spread the word about some of the good apps or the bad apps for that matter.
Absolutely. There's a couple of questions in the chat room about iTunes 11, and that actually is interesting to me, Jim, because I have barely touched iTunes since iCloud came out, when I started reviewing the Nano, I booted up iTunes. But I am all in on the cutting the cord thing. But it's amazing to me how many people are still waiting for iTunes 11. I don't know if they're really waiting for it or they just think Apple promised it to them and darn it, they deserve it. But it's not the end of October yet. And even if it was, Apple, iTunes Match took a little extra time to come out. So I'm not going to panic yet.
Yeah, well, I got a lot of emails about iTunes 11 coming out, and I thought maybe I missed something. Maybe I should read Rene's site more. Maybe I missed something here about iTunes, and I actually emailed the guy back and said, "Was iTunes 11 supposed to come out?" And he said, "Well, no, but I read some rumors about it." And I said, "Well, that doesn't make it true. I mean,"
well, they announced it back in September, which was it's a long lead up, and they do that. So like iTunes Match was announced at the iPhone event, didn't come out until a couple months later.
Yeah.
It was the music event. If they're going to show off iTunes, they're going to show it off during the music event.
Yeah. I mean, if it comes out, it comes out. If it doesn't, that means that you don't need it for the new products, which is really all I need to know.
I'm just suspecting that one day, as soon as it's ready, and I forget what they said at the event, but it didn't sound like it was that far away, Apple will start pushing it, and then everyone will report on it, and you'll be able to download it, and you'll probably not use it that often, even though you're really excited for it.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's some things that we all want with iTunes too. Mm-hmm. iTunes is a bloated app, at this point with the iTunes store and with all the different things that are in there. But like you, I moved to iTunes Match. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I don't care. iTunes Match is perfect. All my apps are available on my iPhone all the time, anywhere I am.
I look at iTunes as revenge for Office Mac because it's the one app that Apple has to port to Windows, and it's just easier to port one gigantic app than to port 10 independent apps. If you're going to bundle, because there's no core animation, no core audio, there's no nothing on Windows. They've got to bundle everything in there and ship it over.
There's a good thought. Maybe Chomp integration is delaying it. Maybe.
Nice. Yeah, maybe it takes a long time to pull ping out of it.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
Jeez. Once in a while. Jim, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. Where can people find, I know they already know, but just in case there's a couple people listening for the first time, where can they find you?
They can find me at Dalrymple on Twitter. I'll type that in, and at Loop Insight.
Awesome. And as soon as Jim gets his hands on all the new products, he will absolutely share his thoughts on them, and we will link to them too, just so you can absolutely not miss them.
I appreciate that.
Good stuff. Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate you being on. And thank you to the chat room. If you haven't joined us live yet, you are not experiencing Shakespeare the way it was meant to be done. Jim is interacting in the chat room. We take questions from the chat room, so please do join us. It makes it much more fun for everybody.
Yeah, and I love the chat room. It's great. We got some good questions tonight.
Yeah, they're smart and good looking, Jim. They'll surprise you.
Like me.
Absolutely. You can find me at Rene Ritchie. You can find all of us at iMore. You can email us at podcast@imore.com or just leave a comment on the show when it goes live. For all of our shows, check out mobilenations.com/shows. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.